Welcome to Bookfulness. Last time, our deep dive was a pretty epic journey, wasn't it? Through the entire history of life on Earth.
Yeah, that was the grand sweep, the when and the how.
Exactly. So today, we're zooming right in. We're focusing on location, location, location.
Right. We're asking where life is found and why there. Why these particular species in this particular spot and not somewhere else that looks, well, pretty similar.
It's all about the geography. We're diving into Chapter 18 of Evolution, 4th edition, called The Geography of Evolution.
And our goal here is to really unpack how the map of life got drawn. It's this amazing mix of ancient geological shifts, continents moving, mountains rising, and then the present-day ecological rules that keep things in check.
The deep history setting the stage, and the current ecology drawing the lines. Let's get into it. Okay, so the starting point is the discipline itself. Biogeography. It's the study of where organisms live, their geographic distribution. Sounds simple enough, right?
It sounds simple, but it's actually incredibly powerful. The patterns you see often make no sense unless you think about evolution. They were huge evidence for Darwin and Wallace.
So how does the field break down? You can't just look at a map today, can you?
No, you really need two lenses. First, there's historical biogeography. That's
Yeah.
the long view. We're talking millions of years, continental drift, ancient climates. How deep history shaped where things ended up way back when.
Okay, the grand movements.
Exactly. And then you've got ecological biogeography. That's focused on the now. What's stopping a species from spreading today? Is it the temperature? Rainfall? Are there competitors already there? You need both.
The ancient stage and the current actors.
You got it. And like you said, for Darwin and Wallace, this wasn't just like a side note. These geographic patterns were absolutely central to their argument for evolution.
Yeah, the book emphasizes their argument had this sort of elegant three-part structure.
It did. First, the idea that every species starts somewhere. It has a definite point of origin, a single region, doesn't just pop up everywhere at once.
Okay, step one. A birthplace?
Step two.
Yeah.
It spreads out from there. That's dispersal. It crosses barriers, moves into new territory.
Makes sense?
And step three.
That's where the evolution really kicks in. As these populations spread and encounter new environments, new pressures, they change. They adapt, they become modified. Sometimes they even split off into new descendant species.
So it's an expansion in space leading to diversification over time.
Precisely. And that whole idea just flew in the face of the prevailing thought at the time, which was more like special creation.
Right, the idea that things were just put in places that suited them.
Exactly. If that were true, then similar environments should have similar life forms, right?
But they don't. That's the big paradox Darwin highlighted. Similar climates do not mean similar species.
And the absolute classic example, the one that really drives this home, is the convergent deserts. Figure 18.1 in the book shows this visually. And by the way, all figures mentioned today are linked in the description for you.
Okay, so paint the picture. Deserts. All right, think about the American Southwest. Arizona, Mexico. What dominates the landscape?
Big tie. Big, spiny, iconic cacti.
Exactly. Belonging to the family Cactaceae. They own that niche.
Yeah.
Now, fly across the world, go to a desert in, say, southern Africa or parts of India. The climate's basically identical, hot, dry, harsh.
Okay.
And you see plants that, well, they look remarkably like cacti. They're succulent, often leafless, covered in spines.
So also cacti.
But they're not.
Yeah.
Genetically, they're completely unrelated. They belong to totally different plant families, like the Euphorbiaceae or the Opacinaceae. They just look like cacti.
Whoa. Okay, so the environment selected for the same shape.
That's the convergence. The intense desert conditions push evolution towards the same solution.
Yeah.
Store water, protect yourself with spines, reduce leaf surface. That's natural selection doing its thing.
But the starting material was different.
Precisely. The evolutionary history dictated what raw materials were available on each continent. In the Americas, the ancestors happened to be from the cactus lineage. In Africa and Asia, those ancestors weren't around, so other plant families had to independently evolve that same cactus-like form. History provides the cast, selection writes the script for the role.
And this isn't just plants, right? The book mentions monkeys, too.
Yeah, another great example. You've got New World monkeys in South America, the Platyrini, and Old World monkeys in Africa and Asia, the Catarrhini.
Similar lifestyles, right? Living in trees, similar diets.
Very similar ecological roles.
Yeah.
But anatomically, they're distinct. Think flat noses versus downward noses, prehensile tails in many New World monkeys, which Old World monkeys generally lack.
Why the difference if the job is the same?
Because their common ancestor lived so long ago, before the continents were fully separated in their current configuration. They got locked onto different evolutionary tracks millions of years ago due to that deep history. Same job, different toolkits because of their separate origins.
These large-scale patterns, where a whole continent seem to have distinct sets of life, lead us to the idea of biogeographic realms.
Exactly. These are huge regions of the Earth, defined by the unique groups of species found there, particularly endemic species, ones that evolved there and are found nowhere else naturally.
Like evolutionary provinces.
That's a good way to think of it. The main ones usually discussed are the Nearctic, that's North America,
Hmm.
the Neotropical Central and South America, Palearctic is Europe and most of Asia, Ethiopian is Africa south of the Sahara, Oriental is Southeast Asia and India, and of course the Australian realm.
And the boundaries between these, are they like hard lines on a map?
Some are fuzzier than others, often gradual transition zones. But there's one boundary that's famously incredibly sharp.
Ah, Wallace's line.
You got it. Named after Alfred Russel Wallace, who noticed this dramatic shift. It runs between some islands in Indonesia, separating the Oriental realm to the west from the Australian realm to the east. Figure 18.2 shows this clearly.
And what's so dramatic about it, the islands are close together, aren't they? Like Borneo and Sulawesi.
Yeah. Geographically, they're neighbors. But biologically, they might as well be different planets. West of the line, you find species with clear Asian affinities, tigers, monkeys, woodpeckers. Cross that narrow strait of water to the east, and suddenly you're in a world dominated by Australian types, marsupials like kangaroos and possums, cockatoos, honey-eaters.
Just crossing that little bit of water changes everything. Why is it so sharp?
It follows a deep ocean trench. Even during ice ages, when sea levels dropped and many islands are connected to the mainland by land bridges, that deep water channel remained a formidable barrier to dispersal for most terrestrial animals. It's kept these two evolutionary worlds separate for millions of years.
Wow, a line drawn by deep water.
But as I said, other borders are fuzzier. Species do manage to cross over time. We see infiltrators.
Like what?
Think about North America, the near Arctic. We have animals whose origins are clearly neotropical, from the south. The armadillo, the opossum,
Yeah.
they push northwards.
And Spanish moss. I always forget that's actually related to pineapples, a bromeliad.
Exactly. Its relatives are all firmly rooted in the neotropics. Its presence way up into the southeastern U.S. is a sign of successful dispersal northward, likely helped along when the Isthmus of Panama finally formed and connected the continents.
Okay, so these movements and separations create these really interesting, sometimes puzzling patterns. The book calls them disjunct distributions.
Yeah, this is when you find a species or a whole group, like a genus or family, living in two or more widely separated regions, with big gaps in between where it doesn't occur.
Like finding matching puzzle pieces on different continents.
Precisely. And they immediately scream, history! There has to be a reason for that split.
The book highlights two main types of these patterns. The first involves the southern continents.
Right. Think lungfishes found in South America, Africa, and Australia. Or marsupials, dominant in Australia, but also present in the Americas. Certain ancient plants, too, like the Araucaria pines, those monkey puzzle trees.
So, scattered across the bottom half of the globe, what's the explanation there?
The immediate suspect is Gondwana, that ancient southern supercontinent that included South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, India, Madagascar. These populations were likely continuous across Gondwana. Then, the continents broke apart and drifted, carrying their inhabitants with them like passengers on massive rafts. It's vicariance on a planetary scale.
Okay, continental breakup. What's the second pattern?
This one involves the northern hemisphere, the temperate bipoles. You find related species or genera in temperate eastern North America and temperate eastern Asia, but they're missing from the huge areas in between western North America, Europe, Central Asia.
Examples.
The book gives great ones.
Yeah.
Alligators. The American alligator in the southeast U.S. and its only close relative, the Chinese alligator in the Yangtze River Valley. Or plants like skunk cabbages or tulip trees. Same weird East Coast NA, East Coast Asia pattern.
So they weren't split by continents drifting apart. What happened there?
This reflects a different history. Millions of years ago, during warmer global climates, temperate forests like the ones these species live in today stretched more or less continuously across the northern hemisphere, connected via land bridges like Beringia between Alaska and Siberia.
Ah, so they were connected once.
Yes, but then the climate changed. It got cooler and drier, especially in the interior of the continents and across that Bering land bridge region. The continuous forest broke apart, and the populations in those intermediate areas went extinct.
Leaving behind
Relic populations surviving only in the more stable, moist climates of the eastern edges of North America and Asia. What we see today are the isolated survivors of a once continuous range. It's a story of range contraction and extinction.
Okay, so we have these big patterns connections explained by Gondwana, or disconnections explained by climate change. It seems like the history of where things live boils down to just a few key processes.
That's right. The book emphasizes three main historical drivers that shape distributions over time: dispersal, vicariance, and extinction. And usually, to understand any particular species' current range, you need to consider how all three have played out.
Let's break them down. First, dispersal. This sounds like active movement.
It is. Dispersal is when a species expands its range by actually crossing some kind of barrier that used to stop it. It's about movement across the landscape, colonizing new areas.
We see this happen really fast sometimes, especially with human help. The European starling example is stark.
Oh, absolutely. Introduced to New York City in the 1890s, a handful of birds, and now they're basically everywhere across North America. That's figure 18.5. It shows just how explosively a species can spread if the conditions are right, and the barrier in that case, the Atlantic Ocean, is overcome, even artificially.
So that's dispersal facilitated by us. But what about natural long-distance dispersal, the kind that happens without humans, over huge timescales?
That's where things get really fascinating and sometimes seem almost unbelievable. We're talking about long-distance colonization events where organisms somehow cross vast stretches of totally unsuitable habitat like oceans.
The famous raft hypothesis, right? Animals floating across the sea on mats of vegetation. It sounds a bit, well, far-fetched.
It does sound improbable for any single event, but geology gives us millions and millions of years for improbable events to happen, and we have compelling evidence it occurs. How else do you explain lizards, insects, non-flying mammals, or plants arriving on remote volcanic islands like the Galapagos or Hawaii, islands that were never connected to any continent?
They had to get there somehow.
They had to float. Seeds can float or be carried by birds. Small animals can get washed out to sea on large chunks of vegetation, maybe uprooted trees or river debris during major floods or storms. The odds are tiny for any one raft, but over millennia, it happens.
The book gives an absolutely mind-boggling example involving South American rodents.
Ah, yes, the caviomorph rodents. This group includes things like porcupines, capybaras, chinchillas. They are a defining feature of South American mammal fauna.
Okay, so where did they come from?
Get this. Genetic and fossil evidence points to their closest relatives being in Africa. Their ancestor appears to have arrived in South America sometime in the Miocene, maybe around 30–40 million years ago.
Wait, from Africa to South America, across the Atlantic.
Across the Atlantic. It would have been narrower back then than it is today, but still a huge expanse of ocean. The ancestor must have made that journey via transoceanic dispersal, likely rafting.
How can we be sure it wasn't just ancient vicariance from back when the continents were connected?
Timing, that's the key. South America and Africa split apart much, much earlier, back in the Cretaceous, over 100 million years ago. The rodents that gave rise to the South American group hadn't even evolved yet. They appear in the fossil record much later.
So the continents were already far apart when the ancestor evolved.
Exactly. The timeline forces the conclusion. Dispersal is the only explanation that fits the geological and evolutionary dates.
That's incredible. Rodents on a raft trip across the Atlantic. And plants manage this too.
Oh, plants are often much better at it, especially with seeds designed for dispersal. The book mentions over 110 plant genera found on both sides of the tropical Atlantic. And again, phylogenetic dating shows that many of these groups are too young evolutionarily to have been around when Africa and South America were joined as part of Gondwana.
So they had to cross later.
They had to cross later, mostly by floating seeds or fruits. West Africa to South America seems to have been a common route carried by ocean currents. A great single-species example is the kapok tree. Ceiba pentandra, figure 18.11b, shows its range. It's the same species found naturally in both West Africa and tropical America. The genetics show it dispersed, likely from South America to Africa. One successful long-distance event established it on a new continent.
Okay, so that's dispersal organisms moving across barriers. What's the flip side? Vicariance?
Vicariance is the opposite situation. Here, the organisms stay put, but the geography changes around them. A new barrier arises, a mountain range uplifts, a sea level rises, flooding a valley, a continent splits, and it divides a once continuous population into two or more isolated groups.
The barrier forms between them.
Exactly. And the classic, perhaps clearest example of this is the snapping shrimp in Panama.
Right, the Isthmus of Panama. We know pretty precisely when that formed.
We do. Around 2.8 million years ago, the land bridge fully closed, separating the Pacific Ocean from the Caribbean Sea. Before that, there was a seaway, and marine populations like these snapping shrimp were continuous between the two oceans.
So the land rises, the populations get split. What do we see today?
We see pairs of sister species. For almost every snapping shrimp species found on the Pacific side of Panama, its closest genetic relative is a distinct species found on the Caribbean side. Figure 18.7 shows this pattern. The formation of the isthmus was the vicariant event that triggered their divergence. They've been evolving separately ever since the barrier went up.
It's such a neat natural experiment. Dispersal explains life on new islands. Vicariance explains sister species across new barriers.
Exactly. Though it's crucial to remember that most real-world distributions aren't just one or the other. They're usually the result of a complex history involving dispersal, vicariance, and extinction, all interacting over time.
Okay, how does that complexity play out? The book uses the example of Pleistocene relics. Let's take that saxifrage plant again, Saxifragus cernua. It has that weird, patchy distribution now.
Right. It's an Arctic alpine plant, loves the cold. During the Pleistocene ice ages, when glaciers covered vast areas, this plant's suitable habitat shifted south. So it dispersed southward, expanding its range down into lower latitudes and elevations, like mountain ranges in Europe and North America. That's step one.
Then the ice ages ended, things warmed up.
Correct. As the glaciers retreated, the plant's main range shifted back northward, following the cold. But what happened to those populations that had spread far south?
They got stranded.
They got stranded, and the intervening lowlands became too warm and unsuitable for them. So those populations in the lowlands died out. That's the extinction phase, pruning the range.
Leaving behind.
Leaving behind isolated populations surviving only in cold, high-altitude pockets on mountaintops, mountain refugia. These populations are now geographically isolated from each other and from the main northern range. Their current disjunct pattern is the result of vicariance caused by climate change isolating them, combined with extinction in the unsuitable areas. You need all three, dispersal, extinction, vicariance, to tell the whole story. Figure 18.8 illustrates this kind of relic pattern.
So when we look at these disjunct patterns today, whether it's the saxifrage or those southern continent plants, just looking at the map isn't enough. Our first guess about how they got split might be wrong.
Absolutely. Geography alone can be misleading. We need more evidence, especially timing. This is where phylogenetics, building evolutionary trees based on DNA, becomes absolutely essential. It's like a time machine for biogeography.
How so? What's the key principle?
The fundamental rule, the chronological constraint. A species distribution pattern cannot be explained by a geological event that happened before that species or its lineage even existed.
Sounds obvious, but I guess it's easy to overlook.
It is. For example, if you have a plant genus that molecular dating tells you originated only, say, 20 million years ago in the Miocene, you can't explain its current distribution across South America and Africa by invoking the breakup of Gondwana, which happened 100 million years ago in the Cretaceous. The timing is wrong. The genus wasn't around back then.
So the dates have to match, and we also have to be careful about assuming where something originated based on where it's most diverse now.
Exactly. That's another common trap. Extinctions can completely erase the history of where a group started or where it used to be widespread.
The horse example is perfect for this. Wild horses today, Africa and Asia.
Right. Zebras, wild asses.
Huh.
But the fossil record is crystal clear. The horse family, Equidae, originated and diversified massively in North America. They were incredibly abundant there for tens of millions of years.
But they went extinct there later.
Completely wiped out in North America at the end of the last ice age. If we only had the modern distribution, we'd wrongly conclude they originated in the Old World. Fossils and phylogenies correct that view.
Okay, so let's get into how phylogenies really revolutionized this. The southern beaches, Nothophagus, this seemed like a slam dunk for vicariance, right? Found across all the Gondwanan fragments.
It looked like the textbook case. South America, Australia, New Zealand, New Caledonia, figure 18.9. The geographic pattern perfectly matches the old Gondwana connections. So the hypothesis was continents split, trees went with them, simple vicariance.
But then came the DNA evidence. What did the molecular clock reveal about when these different Nothophagus lineages actually diverged from each other?
That's where the story got flipped on its head. The genetic data showed that the splits between the major lineages, say, the South American ones from the New Zealand ones, happened long after those landmasses had already drifted thousands of miles apart across deep oceans. The divergent states were too recent for simple vicariance.
The trees split after the land had already split.
Way after, which
Right.
means
They had to have crossed the ocean somehow. Dispersal.
exactly, transoceanic dispersal. Now, for a big tree like Nothovigas, that's hard to imagine. Maybe wind-blown seeds traveling immense distances or floating.
Yeah.
We don't know the exact mechanism, but the phylogenetic timeline is unambiguous. It forces us to accept long-distance dispersal, even when it seems improbable geographically. The DNA tells the true history.
It really underscores how crucial that time dimension is. But sometimes the timelines do match up perfectly with geology, right? Like the cypresses.
Yes, the cypress family, Cupressaceae, is a great counterpoint, figure 18.10. This large family has two main subfamilies. One, the Cupressoidea, is mostly found in the northern hemisphere. The other, the Calotroidea, is almost exclusively southern hemisphere.
Okay, a north-south split.
And when researchers dated the divergence between these two subfamilies using molecular data, the split time came out to be around 153 million years ago. Right around the time the two massive supercontinents, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south, were rifting apart, making biological exchange between them pretty much impossible.
So the tree family split matches the continental split.
Perfectly. In this case, the phylogeny strongly supports vicariance driven by continental drift as the primary explanation for the family's initial global distribution. Of course, there were later dispersals within each hemisphere. Cypresses did get into Africa, for example. But that fundamental north-south division seems to be an ancient tectonic echo. It's beautiful when the geology and the genetics tell the same story.
These phylogenetic tools are getting incredibly precise now, aren't they? Moving beyond whole families to tracing movements within a single species. That's phylogeography.
Exactly. Phylogeography applies these phylogenetic dating and tree-building methods to look at the geographic history of gene lineages, usually within one species or among very closely related ones. It lets us reconstruct much more recent movements and population histories.
So useful for things like tracking human migrations, as the book mentions, or figuring out the impact of the last ice age.
Precisely. It gives us fine-grained detail on how populations expanded, contracted, and got isolated by recent geological or climatic events.
Any examples from the book?
Yeah, the tropical tree Symphonia globulifera, figure 18.13. Phylogeographic studies showed its history involved dispersal from Africa to South America over 15 million years ago, and then later dispersals within South America, even spreading across the Andes after they uplifted. It's a complex story of dispersal layered onto geology, revealed by the patterns in its genes.
And connecting back to the ice ages, those Pleistocene refugia we talked about.
Phylogeography has been revolutionary there. Take the southeastern U.S. again. Studies on freshwater fish like the spotted sunfish, Lipomus punctatus, or the ancient bowfin fish, Amia calva, showed deep genetic splits between populations on the eastern coastal plain versus the western Gulf Coast plain, figure 18.40c.
Even though there's no major barrier separating them today?
Right. The pattern, seen across many different unrelated species in the region, points to isolation during the Pleistocene. Even though the ice sheets didn't reach that far south, the climate changes were severe enough to fragment habitats and isolate populations in separate refugia, maybe different river drainages that acted as warm havens.
So they diverged genetically while isolated in these separate pockets.
Exactly. It's a pattern of vicariance driven by climate cycles, and phylogeography allows us to literally map the genetic scars left by the ice ages onto the modern landscape. It shows how recent history is embedded in the DNA of living populations.
Okay, so deep history, continental drift, ancient dispersal, ice ages sets the broad stage. But what determines the exact edge of a species' range today? If a species could theoretically live further north, why does it stop where it does? This brings us to ecological factors.
Right. History explains how it got there, but ecology explains why it stops here. Sometimes the edge of a range is what the book calls a non-equilibrial border, meaning the species just hasn't gotten any further yet. The habitat beyond the current range might be perfectly suitable, but the species is still in the process of dispersing into it. It's limited by its own rate of spread, not by an actual environmental barrier at the edge. Given enough time, it would likely keep expanding.
How can we tell if a border is real, set by climate or competition versus just not there yet?
It's tricky, but the book offers a really clever insight using plant reproductive strategies. They compare the geographic range sizes of plants that self-fertilize, selfers, with their close relatives that require cross-pollination, outcrossers.
Okay, selfers versus outcrossers, what's the pattern?
Consistently, selfing species have significantly broader latitudinal ranges than their outcrossing relatives.
Why would that be? How does the mating system affect the range size?
Think about colonization. A single seed of a selfing plant, if it lands in a suitable new spot, can potentially start a whole new population all by itself. It doesn't need to find a mate.
Ah, but an outcrossing plant needs backup.
Exactly. A single seed arriving isn't enough. You need at least two compatible individuals to arrive in the same place at roughly the same time, or a pollen grain to successfully travel from an established population. That's a much bigger hurdle for establishing a foothold in a new, sparsely populated area at the edge of the range.
So the fact that sulfurs have bigger ranges suggests that the outcrossers are actually still spreading. They're limited by their ability to establish new colonies at the frontier.
That's the inference. Their ranges are likely non-equilibrial, constrained by mate limitation during dispersal. It implies that dispersal ability itself, tied to the reproductive system, can be a major ecological factor setting range limits, at least temporarily.
Okay, so dispersal ability matters, but what happens when a species successfully disperses into an area where there are already other species living?
Then competition becomes a huge factor. This really shapes the fine-scale boundaries and determines if a species can persist in a particular community.
The competitive exclusion principle, right? Two species needing the exact same things can't coexist long term.
That's the core idea. If two species use the same limited resources, food, nest sites, sunlight in the same way, one is eventually going to outcompete and eliminate the other locally.
So when two species that evolved separately come back into contact, competition decides if they can both stay.
Pretty much. It determines whether they can become sympatric living together in the same area. The book uses the example of wood creepers and ovenbirds in the tropics. Figure 18.1 These are big families of birds. Researchers looked at pairs of closely related sister species.
What did they find about coexistence?
They found that pairs of species could become sympatric much more quickly and easily if they had already evolved significant differences in their morphology while they were geographically separated. Allopatric.
Differences like beak size or foraging technique.
Exactly. If they arrived back in the same area, already specialized for slightly different foods or ways of getting food, they could partition the resources and coexist more readily. But if they were still ecologically very similar when they met again,
Then it was likely one excluded the other, or they could only overlap in very marginal habitats.
right, competition acts like a filter, allowing coexistence only if the species are different enough to avoid stepping on each other's toes too much. It sharpens the edges of distributions and structures local communities.
So we have historical limits, dispersal limits, competition limits. But there's still a puzzle. Why don't species just keep evolving broader tolerances? If it's cold up north, why not evolve better cold tolerance and keep expanding? Why don't ranges just grow indefinitely through adaptation?
That is a fantastic question, and it leads to a really important concept: phylogenetic niche conservatism, or PNC.
Okay, break that down. What's the niche first?
A species niche is basically the set of environmental conditions and resources it needs to survive and reproduce successfully. Its ecological job description and address rolled into one.
And phylogenetic niche conservatism.
It's the observation that related species tend to retain very similar ecological requirements, similar niches over long evolutionary timescales. There seems to be a widespread failure of species to evolve fundamentally new tolerances that would allow them to invade completely different environments.
They get stuck in their ancestral ways, ecologically speaking.
To a large extent, yes. Think about major plant groups like oaks, quercus, or dogwoods, cornus. They're hugely successful, spread across temperate regions of North America, Europe, and Asia. They've been around for tens of millions of years.
But you don't find them dominating tropical rainforests.
Exactly. They've largely failed to adapt to warm, humid tropical conditions, except perhaps at high, cool elevations in the tropics. They seem constrained to the temperate niche they evolved in long ago. Their phylogeny, their evolutionary history, seems to limit their ecological future.
Why? What stops them from just evolving heat tolerance? Is it genetically impossible?
Probably not impossible, but perhaps very difficult or costly. One idea is that the genes needed for extreme tolerance, like surviving frost or intense heat, might fall into disuse when a species is living comfortably within its preferred niche. Over millions of years, these unused genes could accumulate mutations that disable them.
Use it or lose it applied to tolerance genes.
Sort of. So when the environment changes later, or the species tries to expand into a new zone, the necessary genetic machinery isn't easily reactivated or re-evolved. Specializing in one environment makes it harder to generalize or switch to another. There might also be trade-offs. Being good at tolerating cold might inherently make you bad at tolerating heat due to underlying physiology.
And the strongest evidence for this conservatism comes from how species reacted to the ice ages.
Absolutely. The Pleistocene climate changes were dramatic and relatively rapid. If species could easily adapt their niches, you'd expect them to have largely stayed put and just evolved the necessary cold or heat tolerance in situ as the climate shifted around them.
But they didn't do that.
Overwhelmingly, no. The fossil and pollen records show that most species engaged in habitat tracking. They didn't adapt in place. They moved. As the glaciers advanced, temperate species shifted their entire geographic ranges hundreds or thousands of kilometers southward towards the equator. As the glaciers retreated, they followed the suitable climate back north.
They tracked their preferred niche across the map.
Yes, the ranges shifted dramatically, but their fundamental ecological requirements remained largely the same. This massive pattern of range shifting, rather than in-place adaptation, is powerful evidence for the reality and importance of phylogenetic niche conservatism. Species are often constrained by their evolutionary past.
So this tendency for species to stick to their ancestral niches, combined with the Earth's long and dynamic history, should lead to some large-scale patterns in where we find the most species.
Indeed it does. And the most striking, most pervasive global pattern in biodiversity is the latitudinal diversity gradient, often abbreviated as LDG.
Okay, the LDG, what is it?
Simply put, it's the observation that species richness, the sheer number of different species, is vastly higher in the tropics, near the equator, and decreases dramatically as you move towards the temperate zones and the poles.
And this holds true for almost everything. Plants, animals, marine life.
Pretty much across the board. Trees, birds, mammals, insects, fish, corals. You name it, there are generally far more species in a given area of tropical rainforest or coral reef than in a similar-sized area of temperate forest or Arctic tundra. Figure 18.18 in the book illustrates this gradient visually for several groups. The difference is often staggering.
Like orders of magnitude different.
Easily. A single hectare of rainforest in Ecuador might have more tree species than all of Europe combined. It's a fundamental pattern of life on Earth.
So why? Why are the tropics so incredibly rich in species compared to everywhere else? The book discusses three main hypotheses.
Right. Explaining the LDG is one of the biggest questions in ecology and evolution. The hypotheses aren't mutually exclusive, but they emphasize different potential drivers. The first focuses on ecological carrying capacity.
The idea being that the tropics can simply support more species. Maybe because it's warmer, wetter, more productive.
Sort of. The idea is that tropical environments might allow for finer niche partitioning, or that higher productivity supports more individuals, which in turn allows more species to coexist. Competition might set a higher equilibrium number of species that can pack into a tropical community compared to a temperate one.
Has that idea held up? Is diversity in the tropics at its limit?
Well, competition is certainly intense in the tropics, but when we look at the diversification history of many groups using phylogenies, it often seems like diversity is still increasing globally, even in the tropics. It suggests that many groups may not have actually hit some ultimate ecological carrying capacity yet. So while ecology and competition are important locally, they might not be the full explanation for the global gradient's magnitude.
Okay, what's the second hypothesis?
This one focuses on higher diversification rates in the tropics.
Meaning species are generated faster or go extinct slower there.
Exactly. The idea is that the net rate of diversification, speciation rate minus extinction rate, is simply higher in the tropics than in temperate zones. Maybe stable tropical climates promote speciation, or maybe harsh temperate climates cause higher extinction.
And what does the evidence say? Have scientists compared diversification rates?
They have, using phylogenetic methods like in figure 18.19. The results are mixed. Some groups definitely show faster diversification in the tropics, tree frogs, for example, but other groups show no significant difference, or even faster rates in temperate zones.
So it's not a universal rule?
It doesn't seem to be. Higher diversification rates probably contribute to the LDG for some groups, but it doesn't appear to be the single overarching explanation for why the gradient is so strong and consistent across almost all forms of life.
Which leads us to the third major hypothesis, the one the book seems to favor, the time and area hypothesis.
Yes. This one shifts the focus firmly back to historical biogeography. The core idea is elegantly simple. The tropics are richer, primarily because they are older and have been larger geographically for most of Earth's history.
Older and bigger. How does that explain more species?
Let's break it down. First, time. Tropical climates have existed continuously on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, basically since complex life colonized land. Temperate and polar regions, by contrast, have undergone dramatic fluctuations, especially the repeated glaciations during the Pleistocene.
Ah, the ice ages again. They effectively wiped the slate clean in high latitudes repeatedly.
Exactly. Huge areas were covered by ice or became uninhabitable tundra. Temperate species were either wiped out locally or forced into small southern refugia. The tropics, while experiencing climate shifts, remained largely tropical and were never scoured by ice sheets in the same way. They offered a much longer, more stable period for species to originate and accumulate.
So more uninterrupted time for evolution to happen. What about the area part?
Historically and even today, the tropical belt covers a larger surface area of the Earth than the temperate or polar zones. Larger areas generally support larger populations, which are less prone to extinction. Larger areas also offer more opportunities for geographic isolation and speciation to occur.
More time, more space, more stability.
It adds up. The tropics essentially acted as both a cradle generating new species and a museum preserving ancient lineages more effectively than the temperate zones, which were periodically disrupted. This combination of greater effective area integrated over a much longer, more stable time period allowed the tropics to simply accumulate more species.
And this ties back nicely to phylogenetic niche conservatism, doesn't it?
Beautifully. If species tend to be conservative in their niches, PNC, then species that originate in the tropics tend to stay in the tropics. Species that originate in the temperate zone also tend to stay there, but their environment has been much less stable and geographically smaller over deep time, leading to higher extinction and less accumulation.
So temperate species couldn't easily invade the tropics because of PNC, and the tropical environment itself was just a better long-term incubator for diversity.
That seems to be the most comprehensive explanation. The LDG isn't just about current climate. It's deeply rooted in the geological and climatic history of the planet, interacting with the inherent evolutionary conservatism of species niches. The tropics won the diversity lottery because they had more time, more space, and fewer catastrophic interruptions. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. So mapping life isn't just about drawing lines on a map today. It's about reconstructing this incredible saga of drifting continents, shifting climates, species moving, species splitting, and species being fundamentally limited by their own evolutionary history.
Absolutely. Where every single organism lives today is this really intricate product of that deep history. The vicariance events, the rare dispersal successes interacting with the ecological realities of the present, like competition and those conserved niches.
And phylogenetics, reading the history written in DNA, has become this incredibly powerful tool to untangle it all, to figure out when things happened, which tells us how they likely happened, whether it was continents splitting or seeds drifting across an ocean.
It gives us that crucial timeline that geography alone can't provide.
So next time on Bookfulness, we're going to build on this. We've looked at the where, now we'll look more at the dynamics of the how many. What drives the overall rise and fall of species diversity through geological time?
Yeah, we'll be exploring things like mass extinction events, what causes them, how life recovers, and adaptive radiations, those bursts of diversification when new opportunities open up. Why do some groups explode into diversity while others just persist?
It sounds fascinating, looking at the big booms and busts in the history of life.
Exactly, the macroevolutionary dynamics of diversity itself.
So, listening to this deep dive today, it really makes you think differently about the animals and plants around you. Every species is basically a living historical document, its current address determined by journeys and barriers stretching back millions of years.
It prompts the question, doesn't it? When you look at a bird or a tree outside your window, what are the invisible lines on the map that stop it from being somewhere else? Is it a physical barrier, a competitor, or just the ghost of its ancient ecological niche holding it back?
Maybe it just hasn't figured out how to cross the road yet.
Could be. Millions of years in the making, and maybe the curb is the current barrier.
Thanks for listening to Bookfulness. Join us for the next episode.